that have been going on. That means government can just take people who have been surviving and that, and then just say this is radical economic transformation. But what is it that they are doing to assist those people and to make sure that they are sort of getting the markets and they are going to sustain their lives on that. So let me just finish.
Lastly, I'll finish.
Lastly, yes, thank you so much. There's a question, there's a concern that I have also in government departments. I was in a conference where National Treasury was presenting. One of the things, there is a youth unemployment incentive that the government has introduced that is going to pay companies that employ young people. And those,
please respect the speaker.
And those companies that are getting paid, they also choose who they want to employ. So how is that going to transform anything? And in the same government, there is a jobs fund that is also available to fund people who want to start companies. And again, why is it that so much money is in this government and it's not actually going to people who deserve such? Thank you.
Thank you very much. You see, trust the woman to bring it back to important things. Thank you very much. What I'm going to ask is that our speakers, in your response basically to the questions that have been asked and however you're going to frame your response, that will also then be your closing comments, so that that'll be the closing remarks, so that we can wrap up as well. I'm going to break convention, but also just because Simon has been the respondent to the book, I'm going to ask you to start, and then we'll work from there.
Okay, thanks. This shows why we need these conversations, I think. And I'm not going to do justice to all the comments up front, just to give more time. But just a few, maybe a few points where I can come in from work that we've done. In terms of the Competition Commission, its role, I can assure Mr. P, I think, that if a black company or owned company is caught for collusion, they were not arrested and sent to prison. In fact, you will see, if you want to look, AfriSam, which was black-owned at the time, got by far the lowest fine. And one of the reasons was Wholesome had sold to AfriSam, to the black shareholder, probably knowing that they were going to get caught. And if you want to look at that, they paid just about 1% of their turnover compared to the other companies. So I know the Commission was actually very mindful of that kind of situation, where black shareholders who came in got hoodwinked. There's a couple of other cases, Springlight Gas is another one. But of course, in terms of the economy overall, we're sitting with what we have. I'm not disagreeing with that. I think the Reserve Bank having still shareholders is an anachronism. And the problem is the debate is getting captured in the very political positions. But the idea that you still have shareholders of the Reserve Bank, it is completely anachronistic that it is there. It's really quite bizarre. But my question is a different one. Is who is to blame for this? You can't blame white monopoly capital for carrying on doing what they're doing. It's just like saying, if we are not going to have good referees and people dive, why are they diving? Well, they're diving because they want to win the match. I remember, they're diving because they get away with it. But who writes the rules? The companies. You can say they influence politicians, etc. BEE is a compliance process. It was a rules-based process. You buy compliance with BEE. You actually buy the status quo. BEE was set up, right? If you do this, then you carry on as before. This came up in many competition cases. SAB used this all the time. We are doing BEE. Let us carry on monopolizing the whole economy. We have black transporters, truck owners, and we give tavern owners. So that means people must carry on paying more for their beer, right? Because we've given these things. And this is the deal that was struck. But who's responsible for that deal? SAB just played by the rules that they were given, for an example. And so an example we've worked on it. So they can keep out small black businesses. Breweries, making beer is quite easy. Like Soweto Gold is a very good example of a black industrialist who cannot sell his beer in taverns in Soweto. Right? except he sells in Braamfontein and Maboneng, etc., because of the economics of distributing, right? But SB says, don't worry. Why do we need a black industrialist? We are BEE. So BEE was a deal which keeps the status quo. But changing the ownership, the bigger point I would want to make is changing the ownership does not change the structure of the economy, does not open up. Whether it be and DSTV is a wonderful case study as well, which comes from Naspers, which comes from, at its heart, the apartheid structure of running it. They said, you know, you'll put the movies on as long as you don't show any international news. It was a clear deal that they went in. Now, who is Naspers now? Well, around 7% of their revenue comes from South Africa. We have nurtured an infant global giant through that policy. And DSTV can carry on doing that. Now, right now, there's a multi-country entry game going in about building a rival to DSTV. But where is it coming from? Kenya, Zuku. So there are rivals that are coming up, and they're fighting them at each stage. But broadcasting policy, etc., I mean, we can but how does DSTV continue with this thing? Well, typically in many countries, they give the national broadcaster shares. Right? And then they give the national broadcaster the rights to air on their channels, so they get advertising. It's a deal. It's a great business model. They're very clever. Right? I mean, but it's not secret. And it's up to it's a regulatory. You change the rules. You decide what the rules are. Just think about cricket. They change the rules every year, you know. And then the coaches prepare for those rules. I mean, you can change the rules. The government, so it comes back to the issue about, well, what is government going to do? Well, I think this is where you need to build huge pressure, but around specific things, such as data must fall, which is a campaign that's being run. You could run a campaign around TV, local content, etc. Okay? And you need to look, I think, the last point is, I said I'm not going to be able to deal with the things adequately, is around agriculture and the value creation. It's not about the land as such, in the sense it's what you can earn from that land. Can you store your products? Can you process the products? Are you growing just oranges, or are you growing nachos? Because I can tell you there's a huge price difference in that, or whatever products you're talking about. So if you are growing maize, that's one thing. This is a really basic commodity. We could actually be importing maize from countries that have got really good growing conditions like Zambia, using our water for the higher value agricultural commodities, which are there. So what are we doing with it? Where's the money in this context? Where's the value creation? Whether we're talking manufacturing or service, etc., where's the ability to have control over value creation processes, control over our destinies, our economic destinies, in other words?
Thanks. I'll start with P and say that I think there's a great deal of resentment over the fact that we have not seen change in the material conditions of the majority of black people in South Africa since the advent of democracy in 1994, that you still have this ugly juxtaposition between Imizamo Yethu and the more sophisticated parts of Houtbay or Nomzamo in Strand and Blueback or Sentin and Alex, and that the promised dividends of good economic policy behavior that was introduced with Guillet in 1996 didn't come. So we didn't see massive investment in the economy. Certainly, that was not a golden age necessarily, but better than what we have now. I think we didn't have strategies within government to really change the fundamentals of the economy to benefit the majority of South Africans. So there's a great deal of resentment over race-based inequalities. However, I don't think that a visceral approach is going to help us, will take us to nirvana. I don't think that a poorly thought nationalization program, whatever it's called, radical economic transformation, is going to take us to a golden age. In fact, people are going to suffer the consequences of a cavalier approach to economic change are the poor. Those who are well-to-do, we can't shoot both our feet and say that will enable us to run faster, or to cut our nose to spite our face. So we can't do things because we think they are going to offend the white people in South Africa, or so-called white monopoly capital, because they are fairly resourced. They will find ways of cushioning against the economic storms. And some, those who can, those who carry 2 passports, will emigrate. So the people who are going to have to deal with the collapse, deal with inflation, high inflation, deal with economic I mean, we have all these examples in the African continent post-independence. I don't think we should go that route. I think it really is foolhardy to even think that we can do what has been done elsewhere with terrible consequences and we will get different results. On corruption, whether corruption is committed by a white person or a black person, it is very, very, very bad. I don't think we should create moral equivalencies that, okay, the white folks have committed so much corruption, so we've got to overlook the corruption that is committed by blacks. And remember that the ANC came in power on a high moral ground. And if you look at the actions measured against its norms, its morality, it's far apart. It's fallen. It's fallen. So much, so hard. Whereas if you look at the apartheid regime, it acted consistently with its norms. I'm not saying it was better. It was a discredited system. So to make these equivalencies is really, really very bad. Because whoever commits corruption or is allowed to get away with it robs. Corruption is theft from the poor. And it benefits an elite, whether black or white. I think we should stand united against corruption. Finally, the point about, I like the points you made about the voice, the importance of increasing participation, enhancing voice. Because as I reflect on our discussion and the kind of discourse we're having here, I would admit that it's far removed from some of the real challenges that people are contending with daily in the townships, in rural areas, and the language that is used there. And perhaps we do need to have voices from there to inform these debates, because we have academic biases, academic and urban biases that don't amplify the realities on the ground. And finally, on radical economic transformation and nationalization, we should remember that it's state entities that have failed dismally. SAA, SABC, Eskom, Denel, Petro SA, until recently the South African post office. Now, to think that by nationalizing banks, mines, and so on, we will create magical success, really, I mean, let's use our minds. And the really very final point to the gentleman from the Premier's office, I do like the initiatives that you are doing, because I think one of the things that is lacking today is imagination. We straitjacket ourselves, in the tools and policy instruments that have worked, that we think have worked in the past or elsewhere. And I would encourage you to look also at chapter 1 and chapter 4. Chapter 1 looks at some of the global examples on social innovation, social enterprise, strategic business investment or social impact investment, and how sometimes in government we can bypass or move beyond using consultancies or traditional businesses to solve solutions at the coalface of socio-economic challenges. And then the other chapter looks at some of the African case studies. So yeah, I would close with this, that let's think imaginatively. Let's fight against being straitjacketed by our ideologies, where we come from, whether the ANC or the EFF, and let's really think about the future, about the South Africans and the implications of the kind of policy positions we adopt today for the future. It's our children. It's going to be black people who are going to have to pick up the pieces if we adopt terrible policies today.
So 3 final comments from me. Just as the gentleman from the Office of the Premier, absolutely agree, particularly spatial issues are very important. And a lot of that is not just about fixing the spatial inequalities within our cities, but also the distribution between them. So looking at things like secondary city development and the development of the rural areas. I think this is it's a good example of how we need to change our policy thinking. Because if you want immediate numbers results, you want absolute growth benefits and absolute job creation, I still think you should be investing in the developed centers in the cities. But that doesn't create the types of social benefits and social spillovers that is really transformative for the majority of the country. So we need to be thinking beyond the easy solutions and the easy targets and towards these more innovative types of solutions like spatial issues. Mr. P, I think, absolutely identifies some very serious issues, and obviously the inequalities that we see on the likes of the JSE are atrocious and absolutely based on a very unjust history. I think where we would differ is about what we would do about these. If we were to fix those inequalities, that's great, but my priority would rather be about making sure that whoever owns JSE, like large companies and whoever owns these companies, is paying their fair share towards mass empowerment. So empowerment of the greater society. Virtually no one in this country is ever going to own a JSE share. There's only going to be a small elite within the cities who actually are invested in the JSE. The vast majority will make their money through wages and through surviving on the social welfare grants, for example. Making sure that those who own capital are paying their fair share for the rest of us and for greater societal development should absolutely be our first priority, in my mind, even before ownership. And then finally, just to thank Mr. Ngube and the lady at the front here, just with sharing some of their experiences. I think what really I took away from that is just the level of complexity that we are dealing with. That, if you think about the progress of one person's life through the economy and through this very difficult society that we live in, the level of things that they encounter and the level of problems they must overcome are very large. And we often don't understand them. We often can't think through all of them. And to create policy that allows people to be supported across that is very difficult. And particularly, as the gentleman in the back said, when we have the problems that we do have in our current political system. But just to end perhaps on a more positive note, I do think that there